Also, Nathan, a little short is 6 minutes. Okay. Go.
This is the vandalism of public monuments and memorials by protesters by me, Schneider. So before we dive into this, let's look at the background a little bit of this topic. So, protesters are vandalizing public monuments in an attempt to bring attention to the cause or movement they support. And this has been a very common theme or trend by organizations or movements that have been in the past past decade, mostly. These public memorials include any statues, but the ones we're going to focus on are the Abraham Lincoln Memorial and the statue of Benjamin Franklin, who are well known and considered important people in American history. Research question. How are messages sent by destroying and vandalizing public statues and monuments given a degraded value by the general public because of the protesters' destructive actions? Argument. Rather than remembering the message that the protesters were trying to spread, the general public will focus more on the act of vandalizing a public monument than the movement that the protesters committed. So let's look at how this relates to our stimulus materials. This has a very big relation to our memory and our democracy by Colin Powell because of the importance that memorials pose to Colin Powell, and so the protesters are kind of disregarding this importance that memorials may have to some people while doing vandalism. The second one is that the overall stimulus theme of memory is shown in this topic because this will focus on how people will remember the actions of protesters and not the message or the idea they try to spread and support. Example 1. Let's look at the Lincoln Memorial. So before we focus and look at the protests, let's think for a second, who was Abraham Lincoln? So, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, and he's best remembered in U.S. history as the president who saved the Union during the Civil War and also freed slavery. And in his honor, the Lincoln Memorial was constructed in 1914. Now, let's look at the protests that vandalized his memorial. So, protesters spray painted the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with the message of "Free Gaza." This act of vandalism spiked a lot of controversy with the general public and the Free Gaza movement. Rather than focusing on the message that was brought to light, the media and public was angered about the vandalism of the Lincoln Memorial. Let's look at the next one, the Benjamin Franklin statue. So, once again, let's look at who Benjamin Franklin was first. So, Benjamin Franklin is best known as the founding father and a great inventor who contributed to the development of the early United States. And also, he also drafted the Declaration of Independence before it was officially made. Because of this, a statue in the University of Pennsylvania was dedicated to him in 1896. Now, let's look at the protests that vandalized his monument. So his statue in the University of Pennsylvania was vandalized with red paint, once again, from these Free Gaza protests. As you can see on this picture, this was an attempt to justify the vandalism that the protesters did on a social media app called X, or formerly known as Twitter. Interviews from the citizens around the Pennsylvania area and also alumni from UPenn showed that the general public has a lot less respect for this organization, and many of them are also calling for justice for their vandalized statue. Noah Rubin, who is the former president of the Penn Israel Public Affairs Committee and is also an Orthodox Jew, he says that this is a blatant support for terrorism and that the protesters and that UPenn must hold the vandals and their supporters accountable for these actions. Counter-argument. So, looking at the other argument toward the other side of this topic, a lot of people argue that statues that include American leaders who offend certain groups of people or were racist should be taken down. They argue that unless the statues offer some type of reconciliation and change for the future, they should be removed and taken down. Rebuttal. It is very important to keep the mistakes of the United States visible so that history doesn't repeat itself. Once again, we're referring back to the stimulus material theme of memory, these statues are a very good visual reminder of the mistakes that the United States has made. So removing them could eventually cause us to forget America's mistakes and then do them all over again. Let's look at a possible compromise between these two sides so that we can find a solution. So, a compromise that we came up with was education through plaques. We can add plaques in front of every statue that educates the audience about what the person did in their life, good and bad. This allows people to understand the mistakes the person has made in their life, and it's also a way of preserving that visual reminder aspect to the U.S. citizens. Also, by preserving statues, citizens and countries can also reflect on their own society and point out the flaws that are in their own system through looking at these statues, since they are still standing. In conclusion, protesters are vandalizing statues to try to spread a message or because the statue is potentially offensive to them. Even well-respected American leaders like Abraham Lincoln and Benjamin Franklin are falling victim to this type of protest and vandalization. It is important to keep our statues standing and protected to prevent history from repeating itself and also preserving history. Plaques in front of statues can educate the public on the mistakes that the U.S. has made in the past while still keeping the mistakes standing, while still keeping the statues standing and visible for all to see. Thank you.